Hey, good morning. Welcome to the JeepSolid Garage. I'm glad you're here. We're gonna make some great progress on my 4.0 engine rebuild today, but we actually are gonna be working on the head this morning.
Rattlesnakes! Don't drop it.
Let's see, I've got it covered up down here. There we go. And as I mentioned, this is part of a rebuild I'm doing on this 1992 Jeep Wrangler YJ. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you can follow along as I take this through the rebuild and fire it up for the first time. So let's start working on assembling the head here. So this head off the 4.0, this has been cleaned. They hot tanked it, got it all cleaned up nice for me, and they also resurfaced the mating surface here where the head attaches to the block. They really have a tendency to warp a little bit, so if you take the head off of your Jeep, you really need to get it machined and resurfaced. It doesn't cost that much, and then that way you'll make sure you have a nice, flat, clean surface, that you're doing a good job on your rebuild. What do you want? Didn't I feed you? So the first thing I'm going to do, we've got one more core plug we got to do on the end of the head right here. I got all the others done on the engine. Let's see, it's on the other side here. Got all these guys done, they turned out nice. But we've got to get this last one on the head taken care of. So I'm going to install this core plug. We are going to clean up the surface here real good, make sure we got a nice clean surface. And then I have some Aviation number 3 gasket maker that I'm going to put on here. That'll help create a nice seal on that so we don't have to worry about it leaking. This is a real good product here. I'll be sure to link this in the description below where you can find it. So I'm just going to use my Dremel there with a sanding disc on it, and very lightly, because I don't want to take away, you know, surface of the metal here. I just want to clean it up. So I'm going to very lightly sand the inside of that. We're going to take our compressed air, blow it out, make sure it's all nice and cleaned up. Then we're going to use our gasket maker, our sealant, put a little coat of that on, and then install our core plug. And here's our core plugs we're going to be using, and our Engine Tech new springs we're going to be using. And yeah, this build is sponsored by Engine Tech. They gave me these products free of charge to do an installation and review video on. So let's get to it. All right, now we're going to move on to our valve stem seals here. So I'm going to hit these guides with just a little bit of lube here. Now I've got two different types of valve stem seals here, and I'm finding that this style here is a lot easier to install than this one here. This style, even if you're using like the trick of using like a wrench or something that fits over the top of the rubber there to grab a hold of the little seat right there. You put it on like that, and you can try driving it in, right? You set it on there like that. Take your wrench, put it on there, drive this guy down without damaging the lip there. It's still kind of difficult to do that without distorting this, tweaking it, driving it on straight. Where this style is just a lot easier to install. It just fits a little bit nicer and is fairly easy just to push on. And this style that I found is a lot easier to use. It's the one that actually comes with the kit, the engine rebuild kit, and I will link that in the description below where you can find it. You'll notice when I push this on, this little band right here expands a little bit. So that's what makes it a little bit easier to install. And you'll notice that these guys are labeled intake and exhaust. So we've got our exhaust here, intake there. On the top here, this guy is labeled exhaust. And this guy's labeled intake. All right, let's flip this guy over and start dropping our valves in. And we've got the front of the engine here. That's where our thermostat goes. And then the back side here, the back of the head. So we know that this is cylinder number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we have all of our valves here labeled and nicely in order, so we're going to drop those in. And yeah, these are not brand new valves, but I did lap them, clean up the surface, make sure we're getting a good seat there so we won't have any leaks. And in here I have my old springs and retainers and keepers. I kept all those just labeled nicely, but we're actually going to be using new springs. Let's look at these old springs versus our new ones. And like I've mentioned in the past, I find that egg crates or egg cartons are excellent at keeping things organized, especially for a 6-cylinder engine. Everything just marches out real nice. And here we go, we got our new spring and old springs here for comparison. My new springs are from Engine Tech. The rebuild kit will be linked below. If you look at these real close, you can kind of see if you're doing a rebuild, you really need to take the time to go ahead and use new springs. You can see the one on the left, the old spring, is compressed a little bit more. You know, after 100,000 miles or so, many miles on your Jeep, the spring starts to lose some of its compliance. You can kind of see how the one on the left there, the top of it is compressed there. It's just not rebounding like it's supposed to. So that'll really affect your valve seals. So if you're going through the effort of doing a rebuild on your head, that's one of the things you want to invest in, is definitely get yourself some new springs. Now we don't want to run our valves through our new valve seals dry, so we're going to be using a little bit of Redline assembly lube. This was given to me for this rebuild by Redline. I'll link this in the description below. It's a real good quality assembly lube. So let's try to get a little bit directly on the rubber seals here. And we will lube up our valve stems before we stick them in there. All right, let's flip this around and install our retainers and springs and keepers. Now you'll notice with this style of spring, it's wound a little bit tighter at the top than the bottom. The base of it's a little bit wider. It's kind of hard to tell just on one of those by themselves, but if you put them side by side, you'll notice that the bottom touches, but the top does not. And that's what they call a beehive style spring. And this is the spring compressor we're going to be using. This does the job. It's not quick. It's a little cumbersome to use. It works. It's inexpensive. I'll link this in the description below if you're doing this job. It's just an inexpensive way to compress the springs to install them on your valve stems. And here we've got our retainer and our 2 keepers. So we're going to take our spring. This is the top of the spring there. And put the retainer on the top there. Fits nicely. You'll know you don't have it upside down because it doesn't fit on the bottom very well. So put the retainer on the top there, then we're going to use our spring compressor. We're going to grab a hold of the spring about as far down as we can, and I'm going to keep a little pressure on this part where the teeth are grabbing the spring as I'm clamping this down, because if this pops off, if it pops loose, it's going to try to release from down there. That's the failure point. Make sure I've got it straight in here. So that's my recommendation. Just make sure you got everything nice lined up straight. Keep a little pressure down here. And we're going to compress the spring down enough so that we can slip the valve stem through there and get our keepers on there. This method works if you're not doing a lot of them. You know, if you're just doing a rebuild every now and then, this works fine. There's quicker, better spring compressors out there, but they're more expensive. But this works just fine for an inexpensive model. And I just did that to demonstrate, that's why I have my safety glasses on, because these things can shoot springs across the room. It landed clear over there. So yeah, that was intentional, purely for demonstration. All right, let's give this guy another go. And we will be a little more careful this time. And once we have it compressed enough, we can slide it over our valve stem and drop our little keepers in here. And once you have your keepers installed nicely, you can back it off here, slowly putting the pressure on that retainer and on your keepers, and it should set there just fine. Looks pretty good. And once it's installed, everything looks nice. You actually want to check the seat of your keepers there. So we're going to take a socket, put it on there, and we're going to just gently strike it just to make sure that everything is kind of shifted in place there. You can kind of tap on the sides a little bit. You're not bending anything, you're not hitting it that hard, you're just kind of making sure that everything is seated in place nice. All right, there we go. 1 down, 11 to go. So what do you say we bust these out real quick? Now one thing I'm doing here, when I get the keepers in place, I'm kind of pulling back on the spring and retainer there a little bit so you can just see how it seats in there nicely. Then I'm backing the spring off from there. That kind of helps just hold those keepers in their place while I'm doing this. They look like they're seated in there real nice. And we'll give it a little tap here. Okay, last one. Got it done. So let's make sure it's seated in there good. Looks pretty good. Hey Tootsie. So the next thing I want to do is throw a coat of paint on this. That'll be pretty easy. So I've got everything taped off, all my spark plug holes. I got some towels down there to keep the paint out of there. I'm going to do the valve cover separate. I still got to clean it up and I'm going to paint it separately, but it's just sitting on the top right there to protect the valves. But I'm going to hit it with a quick coat of paint. That'll be pretty easy. So while I do that, you guys can check out the next video right up here. Thanks for watching.